While you're watching this video, the future version of you has already recognized this truth. I know that sounds impossible, but stay with me. The moment you clicked on this wasn't something that happened in the past. It's happening across multiple timelines simultaneously, and every version of you is collapsing into this exact point right now. Here's what you need to understand. You're not learning something new. You're remembering something your future self already knows. And in the next 20 minutes, you're going to experience the collapse of all versions of yourself into a single point of recognition. So let's start with proof you've already been operating outside linear time. You've felt déjà vu, right? That eerie sensation isn't a memory glitch. It's recognition of a parallel timeline bleeding into this one. You've had moments where you knew something was about to happen seconds before it did. That wasn't intuition. That was temporal collapse, your consciousness accessing information from a future probability. You've experienced time speeding up or freezing completely, proving time isn't fixed. It's a perceptual construction your consciousness creates. And you've made decisions that felt like they were already made before you consciously chose, like you were just catching up to a choice that existed before you arrived at it. These aren't anomalies or coincidences. They're evidence that you already operate outside linear time as a quantum field of consciousness, but you haven't consciously recognized it yet. You're not separate from the field creating past and future. You are the field. And everything inside your experience of time is collapsing based on how you observe right now. You know that feeling when you're so absorbed in something that hours just vanish? I remember sitting down to write one evening, and when I finally looked up, dawn was breaking through my window. But here's what's wild. It wasn't distraction or being in the zone. I'd actually slipped into a pocket of consciousness where time simply wasn't flowing the way we're told it should. Inside that space, I wasn't separate from the moments I was creating. I was the field itself, collapsing possibilities into words. That's when I realized we've been lied to about how time actually works. Think about your music playlist for a second. Most of us experience time like shuffle mode. One song ends, another begins, right? But what if I told you that's not what's really happening in the quantum field of reality? It's more like every song you've ever heard and ever will hear is playing simultaneously, and you're just tuning into specific frequencies. Your consciousness acts as the dial, selecting which moment to experience. The past isn't behind you, and the future isn't ahead. They're layered right here like radio stations broadcasting at different frequencies, all accessible now. Here's where it gets deeper. That story you tell yourself about your past, the narrative about who you were, what happened to you, the mistakes you made, none of that exists out there in some fixed historical record. It exists as patterns of information that you're actively accessing and recreating in this present moment. Every time you remember something, you're not pulling up a file from storage. You're collapsing a quantum probability into your current reality. You're literally authoring your past right now, not just interpreting it. Scientists have actually proven this, and it's mind-bending. There's this experiment called the delayed choice quantum eraser. Don't worry about the fancy name, just get the implications. Researchers demonstrated that decisions made in the present can literally alter what happened in the past at the quantum level. Not change your interpretation of it, but change the actual event itself. This isn't philosophy or wishful thinking. This is observable, repeatable physics. The implications? You're not trapped by your history because your history isn't finished being written. So here's the practical piece that changes everything. Right now, as you're taking this in, you're constructing your past through the story you choose to tell about who you are. That identity you cling to? It's not a summary of where you've been. It's an active creation happening in real time. When you say, "I'm the kind of person who always," or "that's just how I've always been," you're not reporting facts. You're collapsing quantum possibilities into a specific timeline and then claiming that timeline was inevitable. You're writing your autobiography backward and then living into it forward. And the craziest part? You can rewrite it completely right now because all versions exist simultaneously in the field. Let me share something deeply personal that'll make this real for you. When I was younger, I carried a specific trauma, something that happened that left me with actual physical symptoms for years. Tension in my chest, anxiety attacks, the whole package. Then one day I wasn't trying to heal or fix anything, but I looked at that same event through completely different eyes. I saw it not as something done to me, but as a convergence point where a specific version of me collapsed into reality. Within days, the physical symptoms vanished. Not improved. Gone. I didn't heal from that trauma. I collapsed a different timeline where it had an entirely different meaning, and my body responded to the new quantum configuration. Here's an analogy that'll click this into place. You've watched a movie twice, right? Second time through, you notice clues, foreshadowing, details that weren't there the first time, except they were always there. The film didn't change. What changed was your field of observation, and that shift collapsed a different experience of the exact same reality. Now apply that to your life. Every time you revisit a memory, you're not just seeing it differently. You're experiencing a fundamentally different event because your consciousness is collapsing it into a new configuration. The past isn't fixed inside some cosmic hard drive. It's fluid, responsive, and completely dependent on who's observing it right now. This is where most people's minds break open, so stay with me. Every single time you revise your personal history, when you suddenly understand why something happened, when you forgive someone, when you reframe a failure as a lesson, you're not reinterpreting a fixed event. You are literally recreating that event in a new quantum state. The version of you that experienced the original event exists in superposition with the version experiencing the revised event, and both are equally real. You're not changing your perspective on what happened. You're collapsing a different version of what happened, and that new version has always existed as a probability in the field. Try this right now. Think of a decision you made that you've labeled as a mistake, something you genuinely regret. Now notice how from where you're sitting today that choice led you to insights, connections, or growth you wouldn't have had otherwise. Feel that shift? You just collapsed a new version of that event. It's no longer the time you screwed up. It's now a necessary step in your evolution. Here's what just happened. The quantum field responded to your observation, and a timeline where that decision was beneficial became your lived reality. You didn't rationalize your mistake. You altered its fundamental nature by changing the consciousness observing it. And this is the piece that changes everything about suffering. Arrepentimiento, regret, isn't an emotion about the past. It's resistance to collapsing the most favorable timeline available to you right now. Every moment you spend wishing something had gone differently, you're reinforcing the timeline where it went wrong and blocking access to the timeline where it went exactly as it needed to. You're not stuck with your past because your past isn't separate from your present consciousness. They're entangled, which means when you shift now, then shifts automatically. The prison is believing the story is finished when every story exists in infinite versions, all accessible through your observation in this moment. But here's what almost nobody realizes about how this works in daily life. And it's going to sound impossible until you start noticing it everywhere. I'll never forget this sequence of coincidences that happened to me a few years back. I randomly bumped into an old friend at a coffee shop I never go to. She mentioned a book. That book led me to a workshop. At that workshop, I met someone who opened a door to the biggest opportunity of my life at the time. For years, I called it luck or divine timing. But now I understand what really happened. Multiple versions of me, existing across different probability fields, were converging into a single timeline. Those weren't coincidences. They were collapse points where my consciousness, operating as a quantum field, selected the most resonant path from infinite possibilities. I wasn't separate from those events. I was the field orchestrating them. Think about your GPS for a second. Traditional GPS shows you one route, point A to point B, linear and fixed, right? But imagine a quantum GPS that shows you every possible route simultaneously, including ones that don't exist yet until you observe them. That's how synchronicity actually works. You're not receiving signs from some external universe. You're navigating a field where all paths exist at once, and your consciousness collapses the route that matches your vibrational frequency. When something feels like a sign, what's really happening is recognition. You're acknowledging a convergence point you yourself created by being in a specific state of awareness. Here's the part that sounds crazy, but is absolutely true. Those synchronicities you experience? They're not messages from the universe or fate trying to guide you. They're you from the future leaving breadcrumbs for you in the present. Think about it. If time isn't linear and all moments exist simultaneously, then the version of you that already made the right choice, that already has what you want, exists right now in the quantum field. That version is reaching back through the field, creating markers, alignments, coincidences that present you toward the timeline where you converge. You're not following destiny, you're following yourself. Scientists are actually exploring this through something called retrocausality, the idea that effects can precede causes at the quantum level. An event in the future can influence an event in the past. This isn't science fiction. There's experimental evidence for this. When you experience a synchronicity, you're experiencing reverse causality in action. The outcome you're moving toward is literally reaching backward through the temporal field and creating the conditions for its own manifestation. You inside this moment aren't separate from you inside the outcome. You're entangled across time, and synchronicity is how that entanglement becomes visible. So here's how you start using this consciously. Stop waiting for signs and start creating convergence points. When you feel pulled toward something, a conversation, a detour, a random impulse, that's not intuition in the mystical sense. That's you recognizing a collapse point where multiple timelines can merge. Follow it deliberately. Take that different route home. Message that person you thought of randomly. Pick up that book that keeps appearing in your awareness. These aren't signs to interpret. They're invitations to collapse specific probabilities into your lived reality. You're not discovering a predetermined path. You're actively navigating the quantum field by recognizing which moments carry the resonance of your intended timeline. And when you start operating this way, something remarkable happens that most people think is impossible, but you're about to experience it yourself. There was this moment in my life where I stood at a crossroads, literally had to choose between two completely different paths. What was strange wasn't the difficulty of the choice, but the sensation I felt inside my body. It was like two versions of me were pulling in opposite directions, and I could almost feel both of them existing simultaneously. For years, I thought that was just indecision or anxiety. But now I know what was really happening. I was perceiving the quantum field splitting into divergent timelines, and both versions of me were equally real, equally alive, existing in superposition, until I collapsed one into my lived reality. That feeling wasn't confusion. It was awareness of parallel probabilities fighting for manifestation. Here's what nobody tells you about choices. You're not choosing between options like picking items from a menu. You're choosing which version of you to collapse into consensus reality. Right now, there's a version of you that said yes to that opportunity, and a version that said no. A version that spoke up, and a version that stayed quiet. A version that took the risk, and a version that played it safe. They're not hypotheticals or fantasies. They exist as actual patterns in the quantum field, each one complete with its own trajectory, its own consequences, its own version of your future. When you make a choice, you're not creating something new. You're collapsing one probability wave and allowing all the others to remain in the field as roads not taken. But here's the mind-bending part. Every version of you that could have made different choices still exists, not in some metaphorical sense, as literal probability patterns accessible through your consciousness right now. That version of you that didn't quit the job, that didn't end the relationship, that didn't move to that city, still there, playing out in the field. You're not separate from those versions. You're all expressions of the same consciousness experiencing different collapse points. The you reading this is just the version that collapsed into this specific timeline, but you're entangled with all the others. Try this exercise right now, and you'll feel what I'm talking about. Close your eyes for just a second and sense the version of you that didn't click on this video. Feel them scrolling past, dismissing it, moving on with their day completely unchanged. Now feel the version of you that started watching but gave up after 5 minutes, distracted, unconvinced, shutting it off. And now feel the version of you that's here, fully present, integrating this information. Can you sense them? They all exist simultaneously in the quantum field. You're just the one that collapsed into this particular observation point. That sensation of multiple yous isn't imagination. It's direct perception of the probability field you're navigating. So here's how you use this practically. Stop treating decisions like permanent forks in the road. Instead, recognize that every choice is a deliberate collapse of a specific version of you into manifestation. When you're about to make a decision, ask yourself, which version of me am I collapsing right now? Feel into the different versions. The brave one, the cautious one, the creative one, the practical one. They're all there, all available, all real. Then consciously choose to collapse the one most aligned with where you want to be. This isn't visualization or positive thinking. This is quantum mechanics applied to consciousness. You're not imagining different yous. You're selecting which probability pattern gets to materialize in your experience. And the version you choose rewrites everything. Now, if all these versions exist simultaneously, where do they actually live? The answer to that will completely shift how you experience this present moment. I had this experience during meditation once that I can't fully put into words, but I'll try. I was sitting there, focusing on my breath, and suddenly, time just disappeared. Not like I lost track of it. It literally ceased to exist as a concept my consciousness could grasp. Past and future collapsed into a single point, and I realized I wasn't experiencing the now as a moment on a timeline. I was inside the field itself. The actual space where all temporalities exist simultaneously. It wasn't transcendence or enlightenment in some mystical sense. It was direct access to the quantum substrate of reality, where every version of me, past, present, future, existed as available information I could reach out and touch. Here's the analogy that'll make this click. You think of the present as a dot on a timeline, right? A tiny sliver between past and future that keeps moving forward. But that's completely backward. The present isn't a point in time. It's a portal through which all temporal versions of you can be accessed and modified. Imagine standing in a room with infinite doors. Each door leads to a different moment, a different timeline, a different version of your story. The present moment is that room. It's not inside time. It's the access point to all of time, and your consciousness is the key that opens whichever door you focus on. This is where ancient wisdom and modern physics shake hands and agree completely. When mystics talk about the eternal now, and when quantum physicists describe non-local consciousness existing outside temporal constraints, they're describing the same thing. You're not in the now. You are the field where past, present, and future collapse into accessible information. Every time you're truly present, not thinking about yesterday or tomorrow, you're not just calming your mind. You're positioning your consciousness at the exact coordinate where all timelines converge and become malleable. This isn't metaphor. This is a literal description of how consciousness interacts with the temporal structure of reality. Most people completely miss this because they think presence is about focusing on what's happening right now. The sensations, the breath, the immediate experience. But that's just the entry point. Real presence is recognizing that this moment contains every moment. When you're deeply present, you're not separate from your past self or your future self. You're experiencing the unified field where all versions of you exist simultaneously as quantum information. That sensation of timelessness people describe in meditation, that's not an altered state. That's your natural state when you're not artificially dividing yourself across a linear timeline. So here's the practice that changes everything. Use your breath as an anchor, but not to stay focused on now. Use it to collapse the version of you most aligned with your intention. Breathe in and feel all possible versions of you converging. Breathe out and feel the most resonant version solidifying into your reality. You're not visualizing or manifesting. You're using presence as a collapse mechanism, deliberately selecting which probability wave becomes your lived experience. The present moment isn't where you wait for your future to arrive. It's where you reach into the field and pull your intended timeline into manifestation through conscious observation. This is presence as power, not presence as peace. And when you start living from this understanding, 5 specific things begin happening that prove you're operating as a temporal field, rather than a point in time. So let's bring all of this together into something you can actually live from. Everything we've covered, the fluidity of time, the observer effect reaching backward, synchronicity as navigation, parallel versions collapsing, the present as a portal, isn't just theory to think about. It's a way of operating in reality that fundamentally changes your experience of being alive. When you start living as a conscious temporal field, rather than a point moving through time, specific unmistakable signs show up in your life. And I want you to watch for these because they're proof that you've shifted from passenger to navigator of the quantum field. The first sign is that you completely stop waiting for the future. Most people spend their entire lives in this weird limbo, working toward goals, hoping things will get better, waiting for circumstances to align. But when you're operating as a field, you recognize that the future you're waiting for already exists as a probability pattern accessible right now. So instead of hoping and planning, you start collapsing. You make choices in the present that aren't preparations for some distant outcome. They're direct collapses of that outcome into your current reality. You stop asking, when will it happen? And start asking, which version of now am I choosing? It's a completely different frequency of decision-making. The second sign is that regret and anxiety basically evaporate from your system. Not because you're trying to be positive or spiritual, but because you understand at a visceral level that all timelines are modifiable. That thing you did 5 years ago that you've been beating yourself up over, you now recognize you can collapse a version of that event where it served you perfectly. That future scenario you're anxious about, you realize it's just one probability among infinite others, and your consciousness gets to choose which one manifests. When you truly get that you're not separate from the field creating your past and future, the emotional charge around both dissolves naturally. You're no longer imprisoned by what was or terrorized by what might be. The third sign, and this one is wild when it starts happening, is that decisions happen with impossible speed and clarity. You know how most people agonize over choices, weighing pros and cons, asking friends for advice, going back and forth? That disappears. Why? Because you're accessing information from multiple versions of you simultaneously. The version that already chose option A exists in the field. The version that chose option B exists too. You can feel into both timelines, sense which one carries the resonance you want, and collapse it instantly. It's not impulsiveness. It's direct perception of probability fields. People around you might think you're reckless or too quick to decide. But what's really happening is you're navigating quantum information they can't consciously access yet. The fourth sign is a physical sensation that's hard to describe until you feel it. But once you do, it's unmistakable. You start experiencing this tangible feeling inside your body that all possibilities are available right now. It's not a thought or a belief. It's a somatic recognition. You'll be standing in line at the grocery store or sitting in traffic, and suddenly you'll feel it. Every version of your life, every timeline, every choice, all present and accessible. It's like the boundaries of your identity become porous, and you can sense yourself existing in multiple configurations simultaneously. Some people describe it as expansion, others as a kind of vibration. Whatever you call it, it's your consciousness recognizing its true nature as a field rather than a fixed point. And the fifth sign, this is when you know it's real, is that your life starts looking impossibly choreographed. Synchronicities don't just increase, they become the norm. You think of someone, they text you. You need information, and it shows up in the next conversation you have. Opportunities align in ways that seem too perfect to be random. People call it luck or manifestation, but what's actually happening is you're deliberately collapsing convergence points. You're not attracting things to you. You're navigating the field consciously and selecting the timeline where these alignments already exist. Your life stops feeling like a struggle to make things happen and starts feeling like a dance where you know the steps before the music plays. Because you're not inside time anymore. You're the field where all the music already exists and you're just choosing which song to play. Here's the truth you need to sit with. You didn't just watch this video. You collapsed the version of you that recognizes conscious temporal operation. The temporal effect isn't something you're going to experience in the future. You're experiencing it now, and you always have been. The version of you that clicked on this video at the beginning is not the same one sitting here right now. Not because you changed, but because you collapsed into a different configuration of the quantum field. You're not someone living in time, moving from moment to moment. You are the field itself, recognizing its own nature through this form, through this awareness, through this exact point of observation. So here's what I want you to do. Go to the comments right now and write, "I am the temporal field." Not as an affirmation or wishful thinking, but as a deliberate collapse of this identity into your lived reality. And if you experienced time collapse during this video, if 20 minutes felt like 10 or stretched into what felt like hours, share that in the comments. That's not coincidence. That's proof you shifted. Hit that like button if you recognize that all the versions of you that didn't watch this video have now collapsed into the one that did. You're not the same anymore. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because what's coming next will take this even deeper. In the next video, we're exploring what happens when you stop seeing yourself as matter and start recognizing yourself as pure energy. Your entire reality will collapse into a new timeline. I'll see you there.